All right, let's get rolling. It's 3 o'clock. We all have things to do, including seeing this presentation about microcredentials and academic credit. My name is Rick Stoddard. I am the uh, microcredentials coordinator at the Idaho Division for Career Technical Education, and we're hosting a webinar training, question and answer with Dr. Clayn Lambert from Idaho State University, who's going to share a presentation that he gave at our Idaho Connect conference about how they're using the SkillStack microcredential platform at Idaho State University to create pathways for students to earn microcredentials that can lead to academic credit. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let Clayn begin his presentation here. So
All right.
let me stop sharing.
Okay, hopefully everybody can see the PowerPoint and we can get started. As Rick so kindly said, my name is Clayn Lambert. I am a department chair at the College of Technology at Idaho State University. And in my role, I oversee 6 different programs, one of which is our law enforcement program. And that's really where the impetus for this entire presentation came, was some things that we were experiencing with our law enforcement program here at Idaho State. And our hope is that as you're listening to this presentation, while we're talking about law enforcement as a specific discipline, I believe that a lot of the content that we're going to be covering in this presentation can easily be applied in a number of CTE specific disciplines. And so to begin, there's a couple of things that I'd like to cover in this presentation. First of all is a brief introduction to micro-credentials. You might be familiar with this term, and if so, I'm going to breeze through this, or this might be the first time you've even heard the term, and hopefully this will be somewhat helpful to you. And we'll talk about that concept. Then we will go into what is current state board policy regarding micro-credentials, especially in formal institutions of higher education. Then after that, we're going to move into what the pilot process that we used here at ISU to begin awarding micro-credentials at ISU for law enforcement that we were able to then turn into academic credit, which resulted in a significant change to our program enrollment and program completion from an academic perspective. Talk a little bit about some of the things that we learned, some next steps, and then we'll open it up for discussion. And having said that, one of the things that I really want to make sure that if this session is going to be helpful to you, please don't hesitate to ask questions. I think it would probably be easiest if we put those into the chat. I'll make sure that the chat is displayed on my screen, and I'm going to do the best I can to actually pay attention to it. But questions tend to make the most sense and be the most helpful if we can answer them in the context in which they arise, rather than waiting until the very end and then trying to remember where we were or what we were talking about. So please don't hesitate to hop into the chat and post questions as I'm going along. So having said that, let's get started. And so beginning with this idea of micro-credentials. When we talk about micro-credentials, we're talking about this idea of a stackable credential, traditionally assigned to or awarded to learners for a master. And I'm not going to read this because you guys are more than capable of reading it for yourself. But this is the IDCTE definition of what a micro-credential is. Now, there's a couple of things embedded in this definition that I think are important for us to consider as we go through. So the first thing is a micro-credential is intended to be something that identifies mastery of defined career technical or academic skills and concepts. So the idea of a micro-credential is it is some type of recognition tied to learner performance and demonstration. Okay, so we're not just talking about if somebody reads a chapter in a book. It's that there is some type of activity that they do or complete that can demonstrate a mastery of the specific skill or concept. The second thing is very closely associated with this. It's that the mastery of those skills is defined by industry and educators. And the reason why that's so important, especially when we talk about career technical education, is that we must be bringing in industry as a part of the conversation, because our goal when we do this is we want to create learning that has significance for the people who are going to be, for lack of a better word, using the product that we create, which is learners that have the skills that they need to be employed and beneficial to the workplace. So whenever we create these micro-credentials, it can't just be instructors or educational institutions that build those micro-credentials. They have to be tied to what is meaningful to the employer or industry. The next thing that's important is it's a visual representation. And this is a really key point, that when we talk about the value of micro-credentialing, if you think about the traditional outcomes of somebody involved in higher education or post-secondary CTE, they will have two things. They traditionally have some type of certificate or degree and a transcript. That transcript will have a list of the courses that they took and some type of grade associated with that, which is vetted by the institution. That's all they have to show in terms of what they've learned. Micro-credentials take this a step further by creating a visual representation, and moving into this next thing, it's embedded with data. And that data is specific as these are the skills that were learned and have been vetted. So it's not just that I took a course, for example, in English literature or English composition. It's as a person who took English composition, these are the specific skills that I acquired. This is what the university, college, or institution, this is what they are verifying or validating in terms of the skills that were acquired. And again, it's intended to show the students the skills and achievements that a learner has accomplished. Right now, state board policy allows for or recognizes micro-credentials as a valid outcome or learning outcome for students. This is found as Rick posts, or that has Heather posted. This is found in State Board Policy 3.8.8. Couple of things that are relevant here. The idea of a micro-credential, one micro-credential should be equal or less to a single course of study. Okay? We do not want to create micro-credentials that reflect a large amount of work. The idea of these are to be granular. We want them to be reflective of a very specific set of learning outcomes. The idea is that these micro-credentials can be stacked together, or as the language here says, build upon or complement each other. So you can have multiple micro-credentials that can then be built together to create a stacked badge, as it describes here. Okay, a set of organized micro-credentials can create a stacked badge. Traditionally, if we think of this in traditional educational terminology, a micro-credential might represent a specific module of learning. It might represent a specific set of activities, a chapter, or a specific lesson piece. A stacked micro-credential would then be a compilation of multiple badges put together that would represent, for example, the outcome of a course. Okay, and so the reason why that's important is that when we start to talk about how to do this, we are able to get down to specific learning activities that individuals do, so that we can communicate to an industry partner This is exactly what this student can do as a result of the training that they've taken. These are the specific skills, the specific technologies, the specific practices that they have been trained on or exposed to, that we are giving our name as a validation that they can do this. So let's talk about what we did here at ISU. The first thing that we did was we realized, or we had to identify, that there was a need. And one of the things that we had looked at in terms of our enrollment trends at ISU is that between 2016 and 2024, which is when we initiated our current curriculum setup, this is what our outcomes were for enrollment in our program. And the enrollment in our program, if you look at the number of students who are taking the courses versus the number of people who are completing with either a basic technical certificate or an associate's degree, we were hitting less than about 30% completion rates. So what was happening is we had a large number of students that were enrolling in the program, but very few people that were completing the BTC or AAS. Now we compare that with what happened when we implemented this program. Of a 38% enrollment in 2024, 32% of or 38 students were enrolled, 32 of them completed the BTC once we initiated this process. So we want to talk a little bit about why there was such a dramatic change and shift. And the first thing that we wanted to talk about or realize is that when we look at these numbers of 49, 36, 37, traditionally, the majority of students who enroll in our law enforcement program are sworn peace officers who are currently employed at a law enforcement agency, either a sheriff's department or a local police department. These students typically enroll in our workforce training program, which has a significantly lower cost, and they're normally sponsored by their sponsoring agency. Because they are enrolled in workforce training, they are not matriculating into the institution. So what happens is when they complete the course, they are post-certified, which is Peace Officer Standards and Training. They're post-certified, which is what's required for them to be employed. But because they're never enrolled in the institution itself, they have to go through a separate process in order to be able to get credit. And that's probably the case at most of your institutions as well. And the reason why that's so problematic is because the cost and effort in going in through that process is what was resulting in the incredibly low completion numbers. Once we implemented the micro-credential process, the SkillStack process, we were able to simplify this process dramatically, which results in the numbers that you can see here. So what we really were looking for was a simple way to transition our students from workforce training and to take those outcomes into something that would be able to be accepted by our registrar so that we could award academic credits without requiring additional effort from the part of our students. And so what we did was we identified the concept of SkillStack. Just because it was kind of in the air at the time, the policy that we talked about just a couple of minutes ago had just been implemented as we began this conversation. And so it became a logical step for us because micro-credentials are typically restricted to non-credit based learning. It made perfect sense for us to take those students that were enrolled in workforce training, which is a non-credit model, and then be able to use that to award, to create some type of learning portfolio that we could take to our registrar. So what we did was we sat down as a college, and then we worked with a representative from IDCTE to understand the nature of SkillStack and to make sure that there was a possibility that, and we realized very quickly that SkillStack would be an ideal mechanism for us to be able to do this, because we had very explicit learning outcomes for the various modules in our law enforcement program, it would be very easy for us, for example, to take classes on DUI, classes on, for example, what's the word I'm looking for? I just lost it all. Fingerprinting, executing a search warrant, such like and so forth. Each of those explicit learning activities could be then modeled into a badge, which would then, when they were stacked together, we could then issue a basic certificate for this. So once we realized that the SkillStack process was going to be something that would work, we began then to figure out who needed to be involved in the conversation. So once we decided that we were going to move forward with this, our first thing was we contacted our director of student services. We have a student services organization in our college that oversees enrollment and advising. So we knew that this was going to be an important person to be involved in this conversation. The dean, who was going to be our academic representative, the provost at our university, and the office of the registrar. So these were the people that we enlisted before we started to actually create these things. We wanted to make sure all of the key stakeholders would be involved in the conversation to make sure that everybody was on the same page. Also, we needed to make sure IDCTE was involved. So then once we did that, we started working through the process of how this would work, and we identified questions that were going to be coming up. For example, with admissions. Like we had said, the students that were enrolled in workforce training had not been formally admitted into the university. So we had to figure out how that process would take place. For example, what would be required to get them to enroll, especially if they had not been enrolling previously because they didn't need to. Second question is, once we got them enrolled, what would be needed for us to matriculate them to be able to get a certificate or an associate's degree? When did those applications need to be submitted compared to traditional applications that would be accepted across campus in terms of the enrollment or admissions timelines? How would graduation be dealt with? So our initial implementation, or how we did this, was that we took all of the post outcomes and we uploaded them to the SkillStack website at IDCTE. Once we uploaded those, we then realized the best way to get these students enrolled without creating the need to enroll in the traditional classes, which would have had an exorbitant, our law enforcement basic technical certificate is comprised of 22 credits, 2 7-credit courses and 1 8-credit course. If we had students enrolling in that class, they would be paying the cost of the workforce training plus the cost for those courses, and that was a no-go. So what we ended up doing at the recommendation of our registrars, we created a new 0-credit course. Therefore, there was no cost associated with it. Once they were admitted to the university, they enrolled in this one course. That meant that by taking a course, they matriculated at the institution, which then allowed the registrar to create an academic record for them so that we could then start doing all of the different things to award them credit. Once we had these students enrolled in this law enforcement 0-credit course, we then had a simple memo of approval drafted by the registrar's office that would allow us to then send that information from the program to the registrar, stating here's the equivalency of SkillStack to law enforcement credit, and that's how we were able to then award them enough credit so that they would meet the requirements for graduation. Once we did that, it was just a question of lather, rinse, and repeat. Meaning once we had gotten the process established for the first time, we were able to just continually run through that same process. Enroll the students, get them admitted, get them enrolled into this 0-credit course. Once the SkillStack activities were satisfactorily completed, a memo of approval was sent to the registrar, and then that student is awarded the academic credit so that they can qualify for graduation and the awarding of the certificate. So a couple of things that we've come to realize as a part of this process. Number one, we needed to make sure that everybody understood what everybody involved in that conversation, the registrar, the provost. This is a relatively novel term for most of these folks. We've heard about these terms, but we've never really seen them actually occurring in post-secondary settings. So we needed to make sure that they understood what the difference was between, for example, a digital badge and a stacked badge. What's the difference, or is there a difference between a digital badge and a micro-credential, or a micro-credential and a micro-certification? There's all of these terms that are floating around in the atmosphere, and we needed to make sure that everybody understood what they represented and what they meant. What were the definitions, scope, and what was the purpose of awarding a micro-credential? And then finally, and this was probably the most important thing, we needed to go out and get buy-in and support from our industry partners. And that's probably one of the benefits that we in career technical education have that really puts us apart from other traditional academic programs. Every CTE program is required to have a TAC committee, a technical advisory committee. And those technical advisory committees are populated with the industry partners that are going to be hiring our graduates. So one of the things that we discovered that before we even moved into this, we talked to the police chiefs and sheriff's offices in our service region of Region 5. And the response to the idea that these students could easily get a certification by doing nothing more than agreeing to go through the admissions process, enroll in a 0 credit course for no credit or for no cost, and get these degrees. I had police chiefs that were saying, if I hear of any student who's in my agency and doesn't sign up for this, they're guaranteeing themselves 2 extra rounds of PT every week until they do. So it was one of these things that we had incredibly vocal support from our local industry partners, because they saw the value in when students can get those certificates and leads into an associate's degree. That paves the way for better and quicker promotions, which means better pay for officers, which increases their skills and training, which benefits the local agency and the communities in which they serve. So the more we were able to get and explain what we were going to be doing with this to our industry partners was a big deal in helping to get students to participate. In terms of, can you share the presentation? Absolutely. Rick should have a copy of this, and if he doesn't, then I'll make sure that he has that so that this is available for you to take and work with. One of our goals at Idaho State University, this is as far from proprietary as possible. We want this to become a model that all of you guys use because we see the value. This is not something that just benefits us. We see the same value happening for North Idaho College or LCSC or CSI and having this exact same model, because you're all having the exact same thing happening at your organizations. If you're running candidates or cadets through your workforce training, they're not getting any added benefit other than their post certification. And this is a great way for them to be able to get the recognition that they deserve, the certificates that they deserve, and hopefully a kind of a springboard into additional training that they can go after with very little effort on their part. So next steps, and this is kind of where we find ourselves right now. And I was talking a little bit about this with Rick right before. The biggest thing that we have been involved in this program, this will be our 3rd semester as a pilot program. And I call it a pilot program because there were a couple of benchmarks that our administration asked for us to look at, and they're giving us a pretty big leeway in terms of the time frame in which to be able to collect this data to say. But the first is we want to figure out what the impact of the program is on academic progress. So our goal is to be able to get these students to get a BTC because they've already earned it. They've done all of the same training that a student who enrolls in the course traditionally gets the same certificate. The question is, by simplifying this process and making it more accessible, on that first page, we talked about how 38 students who participated in the program, 32 of them got a basic technical certificate. We don't have the data yet of how many of those 32 that got the BTC, how many of them went on to get the associate's degree. We don't have any data on if any of those got the associate's degree decided to pursue a bachelor's degree. So we don't know what the additional repercussions of the program are, but that is our next step, is we've got to figure out what the go-on rate is, if there is one. The second is a critical thing. For example, I see Matt Taylor from CEI is here, and Matt's in your health occupations department. One of the big questions that we have is, this is working really, really well for law enforcement. How would this work for other programs that have a workforce training component? Are there other workforce training systems that would connect nicely or already are integrated into an academic program where we could really leverage this model of using workforce training, awarding academic credit for it, so that students are able to springboard into a program or to graduate? We want to simplify and codify the adoption process with our Office of the Registrar, so that this was a very novel process. And while our registrar was very, very open to this, she had been exposed to the idea of microcredentials at several academic conferences that she had been to. It still took a lot of goodwill on their part to be willing to kind of trail break this process. And so one of the things we want to do is to articulate this process to make it so that it's very easy for somebody else to know exactly what they need to provide, so that the registrar can accept, what is the level of rigor that needs to be present, all of those kinds of things, to make this a very streamlined process for implementation, both at our institution and so that others can do the same thing. The last thing we want to talk about, and this is probably one of the biggest concerns that we have, is because this is a pilot program, there were several things, accommodations that were made that were pretty significant. The biggest is that because the majority of the individuals that participate in this program are going through our workforce training program, the average cost for our law enforcement program is about $3,400 for somebody who's enrolling as a student, as opposed to somebody who is enrolling in our workforce training program. Our workforce training program costs are about approximately $950. If we are awarding academic certificates for $950 as opposed to $3,500, what is the financial implication to the institution? Another thing is that the provost waived the admissions fee. So students would normally have to pay a $60 admissions fee to be able to apply for acceptance into the university. We don't know yet if that $60, if we were to implement that $60, we don't know how that would affect the enrollment process or the enrollment percentages that we are seeing right now. When there's no cost to students other than the time it takes to click on the buttons, as opposed to having to pony up that extra money, we can't really say if we're having the high participation rates because of that or not. One of the things that we were talking about, and this connects back to number one, one of the concepts that we've kind of pitched to our provost is that this is kind of a loss leader, just like you'll see in during Christmas time and Black Friday. these are the things that we're going to offer at a significantly low rate to get you to come into the store with the hope that once you're inside, you'll keep shopping. And so we don't know if, as a loss leader, this process will be able to generate sufficient financial benefits to warrant its continued process. Although it's a huge benefit to students, we have to be somewhat pragmatic about this. So we need to do research to determine what is the financial impact at the institutional level. And that's pretty much the broad strokes of our process. And so I would love to open it up if anybody has questions, and I'd love to be able to talk about more specific things and go from there.
Thank you, Clayn.
That's more than enough me talking.
Yeah. Thank you, Clayn. That's really of interest, I think, to all and to me. I think it's an innovative program that you've established there. I think for me, the zero credit course and waiving application fees and partnering with a microcredential to help track this and make this recognizable for your registrar are all kind of innovative things that you're doing on your campus to make this relevant to your students and create these pathways of opportunity for them. And so, yes, are there any questions or comments from folks that Clayn might be able to answer? Matt?
Hey, nice job, Clayn. I appreciate that. When you mentioned how you were qualifying it through the registrar and you're using zero credits, is that, I didn't quite understand how zero credits add up to the number of credits that would be required to leave with a technical certificate.
Well, so what happens is that in order to be able to award any academic credit, a student has to be admitted and matriculated. And so those are two separate things. So anybody can be admitted into an institution, but they only matriculate when they actually take a course. Now, what we found was interesting is there's a loophole. They don't have to take a course for credit to be able to matriculate, but they have to have some type of course so that they create an academic record of that person. We have to get them into the system. Once they're in the system, what we did with our registrar is we created 3 stacked badges. Those 3 stacked badges aligned with the 3 courses that the students have to take to get the basic technical certificate. So we have 1 stacked badge that we called Law Enforcement 1101, which is the course that they take. And we created a stacked badge which showed all of the content they would complete as a regular student. They completed those badges. They earned the stacked badge of Law Enforcement 1101. That stacked badge was then sent to the registrar, and the registrar said, okay, they've completed Law Enforcement 1101. We will award them credit for 1101 as if they had challenged the course. Same thing for Law Enforcement 1102 and 1103. And so once they completed those 3 things, that's what got them the academic credit. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So then after that first 0 credit that gets them matriculated, are they paying in full credit for the rest of the full price for the rest of the credits?
No, that's the thing, is that the registrar is waiving the cost of those credits because they are saying it's just like a challenge course. I don't have to pay for the course to get the credits as long as I show that I've satisfied the requirements for that. And that's where SkillStack comes in. It shows how did or why am I giving them this credit? Well, these are all the activities that they satisfied that show that they were doing the equivalent work to somebody who enrolled in the traditional course.
Thank you.
Yep.
Go ahead, Heidi.
Hi, thank you. That was a really helpful conversation. I'm glad you invited me, Rick and Heather. I like what you're doing a lot. It makes a lot of sense for the population you're working with. I want to make sure I'm really clear on the terms you're using and making sure that I'm using in the same way. Also, I should have said, I'm from the State Board of Ed. I work closely with Rick, but on the academic side of higher ed. So when you say for academic credit, do you mean CTE credit as part of an that could start someone toward an AAS degree? Okay.
That's exactly it. Yes.
Okay, great. Yep. I think we just have some slippage there, and there's slippage in our policy. So I just wanted to make sure I was following you with what you were.
So
saying.
to be clear, we are, when I say that we are awarding academic credit, what we are talking about is the difference between non-credit and credit-bearing courses. So they are enrolled in a non-credit workforce training. There is nothing connected to
Yep.
ISU or any other institution by completing workforce training. These are,
Okay. Yep.
there's no connection. So when I say academic credit, we're talking about the idea that an institution of higher education is giving them, awarding them academic credits towards a certificate or degree. So the difference between CTE credit and academic credit isn't necessarily germane to the conversation, although it's happening in a CTE setting. It could happen just as easily to somebody who was taking, for example, business courses or culinary arts courses or actually culinary arts is CTE, but art courses, for example, photography,
Computer science,
computer technology and certification. Any one of those, we could use that same model and develop it into an academic certificate or an academic associate's degree, which would lead towards a bachelor's degree. So it makes sense to talk about this as CTE, but it's not limited to CTE processes.
I should know this, Clayn, but are there other similar programs at other institutions in the state?
If they exist, and I certainly hope they do, they aren't using skills. I don't think they're using SkillStack because
Sorry, I just mean law enforcement programs.
I have at Connect, I spoke with CEI and CWI, and then I actually had a follow-up meeting with other individuals from CSI with the hope. Our hope is everybody implements this because it benefits students. It's a nice perk to the program and to the institution to have folks that are showing up as completers. But for me, it's that this is helping students, and the most immediate is that if they get a basic technical certificate, it qualifies them for a promotion. If they get an associate's degree, that's another promotion. And when you're talking about law enforcement, they can never be paid enough, and this is a direct, immediate benefit to them.
Heidi, we had some conversations with CSI that was interested in this model, and then I know CEI was interested with their, I think their law enforcement to look at this as well. So ongoing. Sarah, you have a question. You're muted. Still muted, Sarah.
How about now?
Now you're good.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, guys. I was just curious because there's a significant jump in enrollments. Did you market this specifically to the students, the new enrollees to this program, about what SkillStack was and the benefits of that? And then second part to that question, is there a specific pathway for them when they complete this? Can they take it and get a fast track to an associate's or something like that? Is it similar in that way?
Great question. So the first, in terms of the first question, and the marketing was only to currently enrolled students. We did not go out into the communities to advertise this. We simply wanted to look at folks who had already committed to the training process, and that's all the people that we marketed this to. The other thing that we did was we marketed it, like I said in the TAC meeting, we marketed it to their employers, and the majority of what we saw was positive pressure from their employers to get them to do this. And it has been persistent, and we've seen similar levels or continual levels of enrollment since then. Like I said, one of our chiefs is a huge bingo booster and said, man, I'm going to make them pay if they don't. It would be stupid of them not to take advantage of this. In terms of fast tracking, one of the things that we do to get an associate's degree from the BTC requires about one extra class on, I believe it's detention training, and then they have to do general education courses. One of the things that makes ISU unique in our College of Technology is we actually have a technical general education program. So we have credentialed faculty who teach for CTE, who teach general education courses. We offer at least one section of all of those courses online so that individuals can be in their home communities and be able to complete all the general education courses, which is really the big obstacle between the BTC and the associate's degree. And so again, we haven't done the research yet to see what the go-on rates are or what things would cause them to not continue on, but we do create all of the environment that we can to make it successful and simple.
Awesome. Very helpful. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep.
I'm going to get radical. Is that all right?
Go for it.
All right. So going through workforce training is sidestepping federal oversight and financial aid and all of that, right? And so is there any way, or has anyone thought about or heard anything on the national level about this kind of mechanism once it's credited to the student on the credit side, making it, what's the right word? Reverse eligible for financial aid?
Haven't gone there yet, just because for the specific population that we're dealing with, the agency is already sponsoring that. So this is not money that's coming out of the student's pocket. So we haven't felt a need to explore that. Doesn't mean it can't be done. It's just it wasn't something that was on our radar just because we didn't really need to. We were still cognizant of the cost and things like that. And so that's why, for example, the admissions fee was waived and some other things. But I don't know that, I don't see why we couldn't do that. I got to be honest, one of the things is, as I've been developing this, and I've had this conversation with Rick and some others before, is I just have this image in my head of what this program could be. One of the things that I think about is I took my 10-year-old son on a tour of the Eames complex here at College of Technology. And we were walking around all the programs, and we walked into the computerized machining program. And I think he just took a whiff of the machining oil, and my goodness, it just sunk deep. And for the next 6 years, all he talked about was machining and how much he wanted to do machining. And he had to just wait until he could take dual enrollment courses. And it got him through COVID. It got him through so many things, just this promise that at some point he would be able to take machining. And I think about that level of excitement. And if you're involved in CTE, so many of us have that experience. If we take somebody on a tour and you can tell, man, the fire is lit and the passion is there, and they have a clear idea of where they want to go. I think about how one of the biggest limitations that we experience is the fact that we are so confined by Carnegie processes and the Carnegie model that, for example, a student comes on a tour in, say, May, we're going to tell them, that's so great, we're so excited. Now come back in August or come back in January when we're accepting enrollments into the program, and then we'll get you going. Imagine if we could take that student on a tour and then we could take them straight over to workforce training and get them enrolled in a course that starts in 2 weeks. And then we're able to take that course and we can use SkillStack. They can take the course in workforce training, SkillStack it, flip a switch, and now all of a sudden it becomes academic credit, and they're making meaningful progress towards a degree at any time. That's going to take some serious goodwill and some serious coordination, but it creates this opportunity for workforce training not to lose its mission and its function in society, but could have a huge thing for us to be able to capture students and get them started in a progressing way immediately. And imagine how many students we could avoid losing by doing that.
It's a great point, Clayn. It makes me think, this is just me, extension or other short-term things that you could also hook a student in more immediately that build that on-ramp to keep them interested in that particular area, but also build the on-ramp for them to continue on their academic journey. So yeah, that's really.
I also believe that, especially in the world of generative AI, we are going to see more and more of a need. One of the things that SkillStack does is it allows me to create a three-dimensional portrait of what a student can do, compared to just having I've got them over my shoulder. We all do. Those little pieces of paper that have the nice gold seal on it. And somehow that means I'm supposedly a master in English or a doctor in instructional design. But it has so much more meaning. A SkillStack credential comes with, here are the explicit skills, abilities, knowledge that I have achieved. Here's who signed off on it. And the data that can be embedded into SkillStack includes portfolios of work that has been created or done. That creates so much more value for an employer to be able to understand what a student has done than simple transcripts with a list of classes and a couple of letters next to them. It becomes much more meaningful of what can you or can't you do? What have you been exposed to as a result of this? And I think that that's a wonderful thing for a student.
Yeah, and there are models out there where these certificates are used. Someone earns a certificate and it automatic. I think Wichita State, which I put that link into their webinar with them, that they've arranged for those when someone earns a micro credential or a badge, it gives them preferential treatment to be interviewed for a job. But I could imagine the same thing where someone earns a particular badge and it gives them preferential treatment or moves them up to the list to register for a particular program, or puts them at the top of a wait list for something on the academic side too. That building in building in those kind of incentives about for someone to cash in their micro credential in your particular environment, I think is another way to think about things. Sarah, you have another question.
I did, just along that line, Clayn. I'm wondering, not only for the employers, but for the students, do you think just having that little, I mean, it's not physical, right? But the little badges and that sort of thing is motivating to them? Like, did you get any feedback from students and maybe they don't know any difference, from being in the program or not being in the program?
I don't know that they can see that yet.
Okay.
But as an older individual who's gone through job searches where I realized that, for example, what can you really do with a bachelor's degree in English? Realizing the ability to articulate and verify specific skills. So many of it, I mean, we've all run into those situations where somebody has a degree and tries to spin it in a whole bunch of different directions. And we're going, I think that's a bridge too far. But if I had some mechanism by which I could look, here is the person who is willing to verify I did do these things. I can say that even though I have a bachelor's degree in English, I learned this and this and this. That becomes a meaningful thing, and that enriches the experience, and it makes it a much more meaningful transcript or
maybe even helping students who don't see themselves as like traditional learners, make that jump as well. So I'm curious about that.
And it also eliminates this idea of how many students take electives that they kind of consider as throwaway classes that don't have any. It helps us to really create a three-dimensional picture of that individual. Here's all of the different things that I have experienced. And again, that gets lost in a traditional transcript. And the degree to which we start using these kinds of things, it really creates a more robust understanding of what a student or a person brings with them, especially if we can bring in non-credit activities that they've done. Think about how many people get, for example, Microsoft certifications. You have the piece of paper, but what does it actually mean? Now, if I'm in specific industries, I might understand that. But if I had a skill stack that articulated, here's all the things that I understand, that becomes a better conversation piece for why do I claim all these things on a resume or what have you.
Yeah, and I just like that it creates kind of an and instead of an either or. You know,
Yeah.
you go into the trades or you are degree seeking, you know, and this seems like there's potential to make a bridge there. So
It
thanks
makes it
again.
very, yeah, it makes it very easy for us to be able to start looking at 2 and 2 and 3 and 1 type programs and things like that, because we're able to say, here's what I individualize instruction instead of having it be sometimes a little bit monolithic.
Yeah, it was a very impactful presentation. Thank you so much for your time.
Yep. Any other questions? Please, not everybody at once.
All right, Clayn. Well, thank you for your presentation and your time. Like I said, I think you're doing something really innovative there. It does require laying the groundwork to make it work for the student. I appreciate your saving the students time and money and creating a clear path using SkillStack as one of the ways to do that. There are other models out there, and I put my email in the chat. If you want to get in touch, we can have a conversation. We can put you in touch with some other resources as well. I'm going to stop the recording, and then if there are any questions outside of that that don't want to be recorded, I'll give a minute for that. And otherwise, I'll wish everybody a good day.